Hello and welcome to Stories with Nidhi Bruce, where I share thoughts, ideas, and inspiration intended to inspire, motivate, and activate you. Find me online on nidhibruce.com and on social media by the same name. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to Stories with Nidhi Bruce. In today's episode, we are going to be addressing shame. Yes, you heard that right. Shame, S-H-A-M-E, shame. What is shame? Why are we talking about shame? And how shame can actually help us lean more into our authenticity. Hello and welcome once again to this podcast. And today, like I said, our topic of discussion is going to be shame. Let me start, as I usually do, with a definition of what shame is. Now, according to Brene Brown, who is pretty much the worldwide authority on all things shame, Brene is a researcher at the University of Houston, and she has done extensive research on the topic of shame. She says that shame is an intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. That's right. So it is a belief. Shame is actually a belief that gets triggered either by some circumstances or something that happens in our life that makes us believe or triggers the belief that we are flawed. And because we are flawed, we are unworthy of love and belonging. Now, that is a very dramatic outcome of the feeling of shame, which is why we need to address it. Because sometimes it may happen in our lives that we are experiencing some kind of shame, and then the beliefs of unworthiness and unlovableness get triggered in us. And that step stops us from actually coming into our authenticity. Right? So, why are we talking about shame today? And why is shame so important? One, and I think this is the most important thing. The most important thing is that a lot of us do not acknowledge the shame that we feel. We may use other words like guilt or fear or embarrassment or, just feeling like failures, but we will not acknowledge shame, right? Because shame is such a negative word. Of all the words that you could use to describe any situation in which you find yourself, to admit that I am feeling ashamed is huge. But the truth is that we all feel shame at some point of time. Yes, including me. And this doesn't have to do with, really embarrassing situations like, I don't know, maybe something goes wrong with your outfit or you turn up at a party dressed up in the wrong dress code. Those are very obvious things. But simple things in life, like if you made a decision which in retrospect was not the right decision to make, and I can give you an example here from my own life. In fact, something that I faced recently. So for me, I have experienced shame very deeply recently because I realized that I was trusting people who I thought were my friends, or who I thought, I wouldn't say friends, but who I thought were trustworthy and who had my best interest at heart. And I went above and beyond in trying to help them. Now, this may sound like a very altruistic thing, but it honestly was not, because I believed that this was an exchange. So, although I did not expect anything in return, but I did believe that this was something done in good faith, and then my actions would at least, if not be reciprocated with other actions, but at least would help me or would hold me in good stead in the long run. But what happened? I was disappointed. And this led to feelings of shame in me. Now, this may seem like a very weird kind of realization, but the truth is that I do feel ashamed of myself, or I did feel shame for myself, because I felt that I was stupid. I put my trust in people too easily. I did something which I should not have done. I gave away too much of my time and my attention. Um, and I felt shamed because I felt that um, the basic shame was basically my childhood shame of trusting without checking out, right? So this may be founded or unfounded, but the truth is that I felt shame, right? Now, this is something which as an adult I experience even today. Shame comes in all shapes and forms. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Now, how can one use shame, or rather get through shame and still live authentically? And that the reason why I'm talking about this is because sometimes when we feel shame, we make ourselves small, right? Because like I said, shame is triggers the belief that we are unlovable and we are unworthy, and that's not true. We are all human. We all experience shame in various shapes and forms, but that does not mean that we are unlovable and unworthy. And over here, I'm going to talk about the three tools that Brene Brown herself shared in order to, as an example of what we can do to get through shame. So, the first thing she says that one should do in order to overcome shame is talk to yourself like you talk to someone you love. And for me, this advice really holds true. Like I said, when I experience shame for myself, I feel like, oh my God, how could I? I should have known better. I should have had better judgment. How could I? And I realize that I go back into that, whatever that, I wouldn't say infantile, but whatever experience I had way back when I was a child, I almost feel like a child who is shamed. And then I realized that if I, as an adult, would face that child who was me, would I tell her, how could you do this? Would I shame the child? Would I point fingers at her? I would not, right? So my self talk had to change. I realized that after acknowledging the fact that the emotion or the feeling that I was feeling was of shame, I needed to talk to myself as someone who is a human being, as someone who had made a slip of judgment or something went wrong, but that's just life. So that's just the human experience. And how would I talk to myself as a child is the way I start talking to myself, and that really helps. That really helps putting things in context. The second thing is to reach out to someone you trust and to share your shame with them. For me, honestly, this is something which um, I realized that it was so important to do, because otherwise, what happens is when you experience shame, it's very difficult to say that I feel stupid and I feel shameful. But if you actually find someone who's like a neutral person to talk to and just say, this is what happened, and this is how it makes me feel, you can actually let it out of your system. It helps. The third thing that Brene Brown suggests is to tell your story, to really tell your story. This is the authenticity of our human experiences. So if you're telling it to somebody, you actually might help the other person overcome shame of their own, or if not, recognize that, shame is such a universal experience that all of us have at different parts of our life, right? Which is the reason I'm doing this podcast, because like I mentioned, this feeling of shame had overcome me for the last couple of days, and I didn't know how to process it, but I did follow these 3 steps, and this is the third part of the step. I really wanted to talk about it. I really wanted um, to to give it a voice. Yeah, my shame does not mean that I did not have the experience. My talking about the shame does not mean that I did not have the experience. It does not negate it, but it helps me, giving it a voice helps me to to analyze it, and also to by sharing this story to help others, right? So that's the reason I'm doing this podcast. I feel that the more we talk about experiences of shame, the more we realize that this is a normal construct and we should not go around it and give it other names, or try to push it away. The feeling of shame is something which is so universal, yet it is talked about so less. Even though Brene Brown has really brought this topic to the forefront, but the topic of shame is still very shameful. Yeah, we would rather admit to feeling guilt, to feeling anger, to feeling fearful, but we will very, very rarely admit to feel shamed. It's almost like the weakest of the weakest feeling or emotion that we could feel. So let's talk about shame. Honestly, let's talk about shame. I still, as I am recording this podcast, I feel like, wow, I'm talking about my shame. And I'm putting it out there. And that makes me feel vulnerable. Another topic that Brené talks about. But yes, it does make me feel vulnerable. But does that make me any less stronger? Does it make me any less human? Does it make me my podcast any less valuable? Does it say that I don't know what I'm talking about? Does it put any question mark on my value as a human, which is in any case not related to what I know or speak about? No, it does not. It just means that I'm a human going through a human experience, and I am taking courage and I am working through my shame in order to share my story. And that is the invitation that I want to leave all of my listeners with. That if you feel shame, then recognize the shame. The shame is there to tell you something, to help us learn something, to help us become more courageous, to help us show up for ourselves, and most importantly, to remember that we are always lovable, and our value as human beings does not decrease just because we have done something shameful, or if we are experiencing shame of any other kind. Right? To love ourselves as the way that we love our children, to love ourselves the way we love the people we love, to treat ourselves like we would treat somebody else who is going through the process of shame, to give ourselves that space and that empathy that we need. Okay, so that is my share for today. Shame and how to overcome it. I hope you found it useful. And if you feel that you have something to add to the conversation, I would love to hear from you. This is me signing off for today. Do like, subscribe, and comment. And see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye. Hey listeners, thank you for joining me on this podcast episode. I'd love to hear what you have to say after listening to this. Connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, all the social media places. Have a lovely time wherever you're in the world. Ciao, ciao.